Welcome to People Doing Good for Others, where we celebrate, praise, and honor those who make significant contributions in our communities. I'm Gary York, and I'm happy to be here today. We want to thank Wilkes Communications, River Street Productions, and 100.9 WIFM for this opportunity. A featured guest today is Shelmer Blackburn, Jr. He grew up in Purlear. He's a graduate of West Wilkes High School, Wake Forest University. He's living here now. He's had a very successful business career. He's a community advocate and a public servant, and we're grateful and good to have you here today, Shelmer.
Gary, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and a true honor to be asked to have a few minutes with you this morning.
And let's talk about growing up in Purlear.
Well, it was idyllic, to say the least. It was the true American lifestyle, to be able to live out in the country and enjoy all the things that kids in the 60s could enjoy out on the farm without a care, without the fear of what so many kids growing up today have to deal with. I was the oldest of three kids and had terrific parents. My dad grew up on his grandparents' family farm, and my mom grew up here in North Wilkesboro and was a city girl, and they met, and she moved to the country with my dad and took it like a duck does to water.
In our discussions, we've talked about family values and encouragement and folks who help us along the way that have a sense for what really matters, and you've been sharing that with me. So let's go back to that mother and father foundation, if you will, and what, no doubt, the meaning of that in your life.
There's no question that my parents were a tremendous influence on me and gave me many opportunities, you know, just like all good parents do for their kids. I just had a mental block.
Sorry. Influence your mom and dad.
Sure, I'm sorry. Thanks. As the eldest of three kids, I was really my dad's right hand on the farm growing up, particularly after school, the weekends, and of course in the summertime. We had a commercial egg business and had laying hens on the farm as well as cows, and so I learned very quickly, you know, how to be Dad's right hand and helped him and learned tremendous values from him about work ethic and how to, you know, to be mature and take care of things. Probably a little early in life, and maybe that's been a bit of an albatross because it makes you grow up pretty quickly. But then there was my mom who really encouraged us. She was a secretary at the county health department, and she would take me in with her in the summertime sometimes, and I'd see these kids come in there to be attended to by the county doctors. There was the cripple clinic where kids who had suffered polio would come in, and a lot of that influenced me and spurred my interest in science and medicine, and she'd sit with me like she would all of us and help us with our schoolwork, and she was a real advocate for furthering education because neither she nor my dad had the opportunity to go to have education beyond secondary schools, and so they really wanted that for us as their kids if that's something we wanted.
Shelmer Blackburn, you introduced me to the self-limiting concept last week and encouragement. Just hone in on that for a moment, if you will.
Well, I'm not sure it's anything I ever knew growing up or even, you know, in my professional life. But in retrospect, you know, I think, you know, as humans, we're always a little bit afraid of risk. And sometimes the risk-taking offers tremendous opportunity that you might not otherwise benefit from. And it's very natural, I think, to limit ourselves. And I've just tried to, particularly later in life, to encourage folks to not be afraid to take risk. And I've had a couple of instances where that's happened, and it's just been, the rewards have been tremendous. And oftentimes following your nose and your heart will really benefit you in more ways than you'd ever imagine.
That's a great way to frame the family values that we talk about here. When your dad, you told me one summer that your dad knew your interest in medicine and encouraged you to go down to the Wilkes Regional Medical Center and find employment there to see if it's what you really wanted to do. Tell us about that.
No, I've never been so shocked in all my life because, you know, every summer it was, you know, working on the farm, taking care of the chickens, you know, helping make hay in the summertime and going with him twice a week on his egg route to Greensboro to service the chain of supermarkets that he sold eggs to. And when I decided that I wanted to go to Wake Forest and had the benefit and the privilege of being admitted to Wake, I was toying with maybe medical school. That was something because of the experience I'd had with my mom in the health department and just growing up, I had an interest in. Surprisingly, one day Dad walks up and says, if you're really serious about this, he says you need to go and get some experience. And I had the good fortune to have two aunts who worked at the hospital. And so I talked to them and then was interviewed by the head nurse. And at that time they hired kids in high school and college to be either male attendants or female attendants in the case of ladies. And I got a summertime job that I had summers and holidays from the time I graduated high school until I graduated college.
Shelmer Blackburn is our featured guest today, and this is such a wonderful opportunity. Let's go back to West Wilkes and some of those role models, the principal, and we talked about Hal Green and Mary Bell. Do that for us.
No, Mr. Green was the principal at West High, and he was a stickler for academics, of course, and discipline, and was just a tremendous role model, I think, for all the kids because, you know, he was so intent on discipline. I'll never forget, Mr. Green could walk out in the hall and would never have to speak, and if there were kids in the hall, it would just clear immediately because they knew what the rules were and they respected him enough to do that. His wife, Mary Bell Green, was my English teacher, and they were both Wake Forest graduates, and they were very encouraging to me to think about Wake Forest, and I'm so glad they did. Mrs. Etta Lee Idle and Mrs. Linda Eller taught me chemistry and biology and genetics, respectively, and they were just such tremendous role models. I'll never forget in Mrs. Idle's chemistry class, at that time you could do this. She would pour a bit of mercury out on the lab bench and it beads up like bubbles and rolls around like marbles. And you could handle that and roll it around, and she just spurred your curiosity and your interest in things. As did Mrs. Eller about genetics when we talked about, you know, how you can take something black and something white or something red and something yellow, and when it's crossbred, you know, you're going to get the best of both parents, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Wow.
And things like that just tremendously interested my natural inquisitiveness, I guess.
We also talked about Kyle Hayes. You want to?
Another good Wake Forest graduate.
Yeah.
He and Mrs. Hayes were friends of my parents, and as an attorney here in town, he wrote me a letter of recommendation, as several other people did, for Wake Forest, and he was just a great advocate for me and a good role model in many ways because of his success, both I think in the state senate as well as in his legal practice. And
tell us about the Wake Forest experience and its of course, it's played a key role in developing the person you are, but just an overview, if you will, of the Wake tradition.
No, it is a wonderful place, and I'll be the first to admit I'm biased, but I really think that Wake Forest, particularly today and has always, in my opinion, is committed to educating the whole person. That's something they're very, very proud of today. It's not just your intellectual curiosity they're trying to groom and to grow. They want to ensure that you have the tools as an individual to go forward in life and contribute, give back, and to be successful. I was not the best student in the world at Wake Forest. I realized when I got there that I was, instead of a bigger fish in a small pond back in Wilkes County, all of a sudden I was a very small fish in a big pond at Wake Forest, even in the 80s. And so therefore, I didn't meet my goal to get into medical school and go that route in my professional career, but the road that I took subsequent to Wake Forest turned out to be okay. I certainly can't complain. But my Wake Forest experience was wonderful. It's a liberal arts school. It encourages you to question, to think about something different, whether you agree with it or not, to at least know about it, to think about it, and to understand it. And so I was a biology major. Wake Forest then had sort of an old school tradition of pretty basic degrees, English, biology, chemistry, whatever. But because of its liberal arts commitment, you had to take courses in many other disciplines: religion, history, psychology, in my case, anthropology. And so it just gives you a breadth of knowledge that makes you want to know more as you go forward with your life.
Shelmer, tell me this about some individuals that I know about. I want to talk about Ed Wilson.
He was a tremendous professor and provost, or the chief academic officer, when I was there. An English professor. His specialty was English poetry, English literature, and he was just an unbelievable example to follow. He had this booming voice and a cadence in his speech when he spoke that just made you want to be like him. He contributed to Wake Forest in so many ways. He was a graduate of Wake Forest College and then went on to Harvard to study English, and then brought that back to Wake Forest, and today is still considered Mr. Wake Forest. I have the privilege of seeing him on occasion, and I still call him Provost Wilson because that's what he will always be, even though he's now retired.
Shelmer, let's go to career, and if you will, just pick it up and leaving Wake, and there was a mentor courier. Just help me along there, if you will, and kind of carry the ball here for a while.
No, I made it through Wake. As I said, I wasn't the student that I could have been, but I got a great education, both academically and socially. And I think that's important for anybody, whether you're going to high school, whether you're going to community college, whether you go on to, college or go to work in the workforce. It's important that you get that education. So I didn't have the grades that it took to get into med school, so, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I had the good fortune of hearing about a job in Washington, D.C. As a transplant coordinator, it was called then, may still be called that. And I met and became dear friends and colleagues, in fact, with a physician, Charles Currier, who was chief of transplantation at the Washington Hospital Center. This would have been in about 1983. And he liked to hire young people fresh out of college who were trying to get their sea legs and figure out what they were going to do when they grow up. And the job entailed interacting with families of accident victims who were subsequently brain dead and discussing the option of organ donation with them. And then at their request, following that on through the intensive care management of the brain dead patient, and then the retrieval of whatever organ systems they had donated, and then working with the labs to find the suitable matches and get those organs to the needy recipients. Wow. A tremendous job, as you can imagine, for a kid right out of college. On the job training, there was no formal education other than a little intellect and a desire to not be self-limiting.
Yeah.
You know.
You learned a lot about trust, didn't you?
And trust and mentors, because Dr. Currier was just a tremendous mentor to me, in that it was never why you can't do this, it's how can we do this. Probably was my first experience with that, other than my experience with my parents back home, that, you know, don't ask, you know, it's not why not, it's why. So it was a great experience. I did that about 5 years, and it actually led me to what would become my professional career in the pharmaceutical industry, because near the end of my time at the Washington Hospital Center as a transplant coordinator, we'd done a clinical trial of a drug that Burroughs Wellcome Company had, and we were using it to test its improvement in organ preservation. And at the end of that trial, they offered me a job, which I subsequently accepted, and that brought me back to North Carolina and the beginnings of my career in the world of pharmaceuticals, and particularly research and development and the clinical trials of other drugs with them.
And you talked about pulmonary hypertension. Was that part of what we said?
When I was first hired at Burroughs Wellcome, my first drug was actually a drug for respiratory distress syndrome in premature babies.
Okay.
And so we developed this artificial surfactant, which was approved by the FDA, and it's basically a soapy substance that helps the lungs to expand. And so it saved the lives of, you know, hundreds of infants that were born prematurely. And at the end of that trial, my next drug that I studied was for a disease, as you say.
And that was with United Therapeutics?
Called pulmonary hypertension.
Okay.
We started the initial trials in pulmonary hypertension while I was at Burroughs Wellcome. They had a drug that's a naturally occurring substance that one of their scientists, who subsequently became a Nobel laureate, they actually had 5 at Burroughs Wellcome, 5 Nobel laureates. So it was a wonderful place to work. And so we worked on this drug in the disease pulmonary hypertension, which is a rare orphan disease affecting less than 100,000 people. But yet that was Wellcome's mantra, was we're developing drugs for the need, not necessarily for the financial reward.
Right.
And pulmonary hypertension is just high blood pressure between the heart and lungs. You may have normal body blood pressure, but this high blood pressure in the lung system. And at that time, the only treatment was a lung transplant. So this, again, was a great opportunity to help and be involved in a life-saving therapy that's made such a difference.
And then you felt a need to come back home. It was time for a change, and you were involved in the Wake Forest Divinity School. Tell us about that experience.
Sure. And maybe before we go quite to that, we ought to talk about my subsequent pharmaceutical experience with United Therapeutics.
Yes.
I had an opportunity in the early 1990s to be one of 4 founders in a startup pharmaceutical company, and it's called United Therapeutics. So we took a second-generation drug and developed it for the treatment of pulmonary hypertension. And instead of the first-generation drug, which was a 24-hour continuous intravenous infusion, this drug could be delivered in a less, in a safer way.
Okay.
It was delivered under the skin, much like insulin. And so we took that through development worked and fought with the FDA and got it approved. And subsequent to that, and the company going public, I saw that I'd done what I had gone there to do, and made the choice to come back home to the farm.
And that you wouldn't be self-limited. You were continuing to push for.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, as you can imagine, a startup company is kind of scary. Again, I took the risk, thinking if I had nothing to lose to do this, because I could always, if it failed, I felt pretty confident I could come back and ask for my old job back at what was then Glaxo Wellcome, because it had merged with Glaxo Pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
And I did that, and the result was an independence that enabled me to come back home and then, you know, start a second career.
Sure.
and have time with my late parents.
Yep. The Divinity School, Wake Divinity School, was very important to you.
Yeah, that was really my first experience giving back to Wake Forest. I'd never been a contributor back to the school in a significant way. Perhaps a little bit of a chip on my shoulder because I didn't perform as well there as I could have. Well, that wasn't their fault, was it? It was my own fault. So I was asked by a classmate who had subsequently gone to work for the university as a development officer when the university decided to start a new graduate school, and that was a School of Divinity. And I felt like that it was, you know, another jewel in the crown of Wake Forest, because they have their college, their medical school, their law school, their graduate school. But like all fine institutions, they needed a divinity school to educate people to go out in the community and teach, you know, us citizens, you know, how to live better lives, whether that's in the pulpit, in the hospital as a pastoral care advisor,
Sure.
or in a soup kitchen.
Yep.
So I accepted an invitation to join what's called a board of visitors, which is basically like an advisory board.
Sure.
To help them initially start up. And in retrospect, it probably was also my interest in involvement in startups, like a pharmaceutical
Sure.
startup, to be involved on the ground level. Good. And in some small way, hopefully, provide encouragement and ideas and advice to grow them. And that was now some 15 years ago, and it's just blossomed to be a great attribute to the university, and as I said, another crown, another star in their crown.
Yeah. Shelmer, talk about that wonderful honor of being a trustee.
Well, my service as to the School of Divinity did bloom into an invitation to join the overall Board of Trustees for the university. And it's quite an honor, an unbelievable honor that I'm very privileged to have, and I'm just beginning my second four-year term as one of those folks that, again, in some small way, in my case, I hope to be able to provide some guidance.
Shelmer Blackburn, let us talk about, I think, a hallmark in your life and your career is with your parents, Shelmer and Ruby, and the adult daycare, and this sense of calling, if you will, to bring this to life here in Wilkes County. And when I heard about it the first time, I was just overwhelmed with, wow, what a wonderful thing to do. So if you'll spend the rest of our time together talking about that.
Thank you, Gary. It is probably my proudest endeavor that I've helped with. When I came back home from United Therapeutics and decided to end my professional career and come back to the farm, my mother was in about her third or fourth year of severe dementia. And we subsequently had to get in-home care to assist my dad and we three kids in her care. There wasn't a facility in town that you could take someone who could not spend their day alone, who had to have constant supervision. So I had the good fortune to be asked to a Vision 2020 meeting where the adult daycare idea was being discussed, and it had sort of been spinning its wheels for a few years, and I took it as a commitment, again, the startup idea in retrospect.
Yeah.
And with many other people, put some wheels under it and actually got it rolling.
The Medical Foundation, some grants and contributions from family, and what an incredible community asset.
Well, and it was a true community effort because we did, through the Health Foundation as the fundraising unit, they had done some fundraising obviously before, so they guided us through this. Through the great generosity of my uncle and aunt, Dwight and Ann Pardue, and myself, we became the lead patrons, and hopefully through an example that we set, encouraged others, and in the course of just under 2 years, we were able to raise about $2 million and then make the adult daycare center a true reality as opposed to the idea.
The Ruby Pardue Blackburn, I just how in awe I am of being involved in such an endeavor. One other individual that I want to touch is John Cothran with the Cooperative Extension, and you talked about what a great encourager he is.
Oh, he is. When I came back home and became involved in the farm again and growing it, I got to know John through the North Carolina and Wilkes County Cattlemen's Associations. And he was at that time an ag teacher at East High and North High, and then subsequently was interested in taking over a job that was available with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture Extension Service. And I encouraged him to do that, and he was a natural for it, and he's carrying on his teaching role now into the greater community of cattlemen and folks in agriculture in Wilkes County.
Well, Shelmer Blackburn, you've honored us in a special way today, and we've enjoyed learning about your journey and your servant's heart. That's a key part of, and not to be self-limited and to be great encouragers. And we want to thank Wilkes Communications and River Street Productions and also 100.9 WIFM. And would you close with just a quick overview of the quality of life you've lived and the opportunities that you've had to live and to grow and to share and to give to people?
Well, thank you, Gary, again for having me. And my journey is not special. It's one of that many other people have also had the opportunities for. I would just encourage folks to realize the importance of where they come from, the values that we have as young people, and the opportunities that we have to give back to our communities, and the importance of setting an example for those who are coming behind us.
And to always remember that in giving we receive.
Manyfold.
God bless you, friend.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for being here.